Welcome to Midweek Mysteries, and thank you all for being here. I am your host, Nick Ryan. If you're new to the show, Midweek Mysteries is a shorter version of our full-length Sunday episodes, where we also enjoy giving a personal shout-out to our newest supporters, so please be sure to tune in. If you're interested in supporting the show, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal, where you can make a simple one-time donation. And don't forget that sharing, reviewing, and subscribing to the podcast helps to support us as well, and we thank you. Now let's see what today's storyteller has to say. Today's Midweek Mystery comes to us from Lanico. Lanico says, "Hi Nick, I found your podcast this year and have been hooked ever since. I don't really watch TV anymore, so podcasts have become my main source of entertainment while I work on my art. I find the stories so compelling and sincere that come from the listeners, and let's say that I have a very strong sense for when I think stories are true or not. It's hard to find paranormal shows that aren't exploiting the topic or just entirely false. I think my use of the term entertainment isn't even entirely accurate in regards to me. It's more research and comparing stories to help me sort through the truth within my own life. I knew that eventually I would need to submit, but as I have a very complicated story, I wanted to wait before doing so, and quite obviously, with everything going on in the world, it was hard to find the strength to do so, as well as I have been very scared to share these stories with the world outside of a few trusted friends and immediate family members. However, after becoming a patron, when you mentioned the new patrons, and you mentioned my name, it seemed fated that it was the story about a medium, and it was then that I realized that I needed to share my story. I was born in 1984, and had always been what others described as different, and very mature, even as a toddler. I knew this was true, as I seemed to have the hyper-awareness of an adult, although my body didn't respond to or function the way I intended. My visitations began early on, and when I say early, I mean I can still remember crawling. I am starting to think that having a very powerful memory is a trait, or at least has something to do with what others would describe as psychic abilities. The issue was, when I became a toddler, the visitations became more direct and less surreal as they did when I was a baby. Even as a toddler, there was still a sense of surreal surrounding the visitations, and I still didn't fully understand them. Sorry for the lengthy amount of context here, but I feel that this is important, as I will have what will be a never-ending supply of stories. Sometimes when I think about my life in its entirety, even I am shocked. As a young child, I was very hesitant to share what was happening to me, not to say that I didn't try to here and again. However, as parents like to comfort their children and say that it was just a dream or something else, I was quick to learn that explaining these things was not going to lead to any resolution, and it was going to be up to me to figure out what was going on and why. It was these unexplainable events that made me question many things, and not take what mainstream society showed me for truth. Fortunately, my parents were not strict and were open-minded, so they did not mind my interest in the paranormal, despite me not telling them the level of involvement I had with this other world. It was just when I mentioned actual events that they seemed to downplay it, more for the sake of not wanting to scare me, at least in their own minds. However, due to the constant and early experiences, you could say I became quite accustomed to seeing things, and so this is some of the background I would like to add if you decide to share any of my stories. I had seen what many may describe as terrifying experiences, and I would never scream or panic. You see, I had become quite used to it, and even had a visitation from what I can only describe as a heavenly entity when I was about 2 or 3 years old, that warned me that just because I couldn't see things with my regular eyes, it didn't mean that they weren't there, and showed me images of a tuning fork and radio, explaining that many things were frequency-based. This is a story for another time, as there is more to it, but when I tell my stories, I just don't want listeners to question my obvious lack of screaming and or running. In fact, I came to learn that many of these things feed directly off of fear, and that the less scared I was, the more it frustrated them, although sometimes it backfired, and their schemes occasionally became more aggressive or psychologically manipulative versus just trying the old-fashioned method of scaring me. Now, when I mention entities, I'm addressing an entire range of beings. Since I mentioned the year I was born, this is background context for the fact that I was unable to have access to the internet or other tools to explain this, and living where I live, a very conservative, military-ran city in Colorado, these sorts of topics were always frowned upon to discuss in general, if people even knew in the first place. So it was nearly impossible for many years to be able to distinguish what was what, until my abilities became more sharp as I got older. Even now, when I go back to certain memories, I'm able to figure out what something really was, for better or for worse, due to the fact that my abilities became stronger. Sometimes some of these things may not have been all that bad or needed help, but as a child, it was all the same to me. Scary. When your listeners mention the topic of sleep paralysis, I am all too sympathetic to them, as I have had, over a lifetime, most likely thousands of episodes if you count every time I was able to get out of it, only to fall back into it within the same night. I have a lot of advice for listeners on this topic from personal experience, as well as for warding off many of these things, which is a large part of why I am deciding to share this, in addition to getting this off my chest. This story I would like to share has to do with the neighborhood I used to live in, and while I have many I could share, I would like to talk about a specific topic that I am hesitant to even type these letters out. Skinwalkers. I have lived in the same conservative military city all of my life, until 2016, when I moved to Denver, but my family had moved houses several times in that period. For this story, the house itself wasn't even that old for the time. We moved in 1995, and the house had been built around 1988, I believe, and had the same owners that were still living. When we moved into the house, I didn't notice anything right away, energy-wise. For this particular story, however, we are going to fast forward to 1998, when I was in 8th grade. I had already had countless paranormal incidents in this house already, but this incident is particularly chilling and involved many of the neighborhood children as well. My best friend Kari lived in a house a bit down the road away, but still close by. We were having a sleepover, and it was August. It was getting close to our summer vacation being over as we started school late August, but it was also still extremely hot, so we left the windows open. We were playing video games, and had turned the PlayStation off to do the next activity. This is when we both heard a mysterious sound outside, and for whatever reason, both of us suddenly agreed that we had a strange feeling that we were in danger. It initially sounded a bit like a dog howling painfully in the distance, but something was dreadfully off that made both of our hearts sink and look at each other with that, "Oh God" face. Keep in mind, my best friend was already aware of the type of things I attracted, so I could see the fear in her eyes. I decided to slowly crawl over to the window, as whatever it was sounded like it was outside, just down around 3 to 4 houses away, but in the middle of the street. I hoped that maybe this strange sound was a sick dog or weird breed, but when I got close to the window is when I knew this was extremely bad. It was as if a howling animal went from a bloody howl into a screaming being. I can't even say human, because not only did it not sound like a dog truly, but it turned into what I would say is a humanoid shriek towards the tail end of the noise. But the resonance of this creature was not human. It is hard to put into words, but the best comparison I can give is a Star Wars reference. In Episode 2, the main characters are in the arena and about to be attacked by all of the beasts. It was similar to the 3-horned bull-like creature, the way the noise sort of trails off into something else at the end. So, a howl that turned into this shriek that morphed. Even that creature in Star Wars didn't sound nearly as terrifying as this. It was almost as if the frequency and resonance of it was just from another world entirely. It continued to just get closer and closer to the house, but by now we turned the lights off and began praying. We had spent enough time close to the open window behind the curtains rationalizing what this could be, and we knew this was no dog and no human, so we began to pray and stayed awake all night, even after the noise finally disappeared. Now, this could be explained away potentially by some skeptics, but the story got worse. This next incident took place at my house. Again, it is still that same summer. My sister had broken my window years before when she was sneaking out of the house, and so, in order to open the new window pane that was installed incorrectly by her boyfriend, I had to remove the entire thing off the tracks and replace it later when I was done. So, if it was hot, I just had to take the whole blasted thing off to get a breeze. I was laying down in my room when I heard what sounded like a four-legged creature, or animal, pacing down below by the porch. Immediately, my instincts knew that something was wrong, but again, I chose to wait and analyze the situation before deciding to panic or not. It was pacing back and forth, and very quickly, and what almost felt angrily, because the steps were so fast-paced. Almost like when a tiger at the zoo feels threatened and paces back and forth in its cage. Only this was also making the unearthly growling noises. The strange thing was, just hearing the footsteps, I could just feel the heaviness of the creature. It sounded big and menacing somehow. Not like a dog. Just very heavy-footed, with this deep growl, deeper than what is called guttural. I am pretty stupidly brave, maybe even just stupid, and since the window was entirely out and there was no screen, I decided to venture out on the roof to see what this was. I knew I could be in for it and see something horrifying, but as I told you before, I had already seen plenty, and this was starting to annoy me. I slowly peered over the edge of the roof, and the noise just stopped. The thing is, if this was some animal, I would have heard it or seen it run away, but there was nothing, just gone. I was slightly annoyed at this point, and I already knew this had to be some sort of paranormal nonsense again. I crawled back into my room and onto my bed, which was directly next to the window, and the same noises continued. Now I am annoyed, as I know this thing is messing with me, and this is when I decide to just go downstairs, out the front door, and onto the porch. I go out there, and again, nothing. Almost. I start to walk around the front yard. When I reach the point outside my room, I see something extremely strange. A perfect circle in the grass. It was like a crop circle almost. Perfectly pressed down grass. Perfectly mathematically circular. I mowed the grass for my parents, and I know this wasn't there before, and there was nothing in the front yard to have produced this. I instantly knew that this was from something from another world, and this must have been evidence of some sort of portal that had opened, or perhaps related to extraterrestrials, and it didn't end there either. As August progressed, school had finally started, and I was now a freshman, taking the bus to high school on the other side of town. When I was laying in bed, I heard the same inhuman, shrieking noises from Kare's house outside going down the street, headed toward the park with a creak. Since I was accustomed to paranormal harassment at this point, I didn't pay it much mind, but I was curious to see what the kids would have to say on the bus the next day. Sure enough, the entire neighborhood was in a panic about a mysterious creature they had heard outside their rooms. I actually sort of smiled because I have a morbid humor, and I was glad that everyone else had to experience a sliver of what I do. They were arguing if it was a mountain lion, which live in the hills miles away, not in our backyard, way out east in the fields, and everyone else shot that hypothesis down immediately. I could see the terror in some of the kids' eyes. That seemed to have been the last of that episode, but it had evolved into something else. When I became a sophomore, I had befriended a friendly video game nerd called James. James had invited me over to play Chrono Cross, which hadn't been released in America yet, and he learned Japanese just to play this game. Unimportant, I know, but scary in its own right. Anyway, James began telling me a story about how when he was walking around the neighborhood at night, a shadowy mist of white smoke, shaped somewhat like a dog, had given chase to him, and forcing him to jump a fence. When he turned briefly to see if it was going to jump as well, he said once it leaped, it disappeared mid-jump. Now the thing is, I was beginning to suspect it could be the same thing, but I hadn't collected enough information yet. It was later that year that my sister burst into the house in a panic about something that had happened outside. Apparently, she had gone to the corner store to pick something up, and when she was pulling into the cul-de-sac to park in front of the house, a figure of a dog that was a misty smoke appeared and then disappeared in front of her and scared her to death. Now the thing is, I had never heard of Skinwalkers before. I will tell you that when I was in elementary school in this same house, I was sitting and watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries late at night downstairs in the living room by a window when something knocked loudly on the window next to me, and when I looked outside, there was nothing there. The episode was about these children living in Oklahoma that were being harassed by spirits, disguising themselves as clowns, or showing up as Native Americans. In one part of the story, the spirits were pushing and shaking the children's beds. I suddenly felt a very bad feeling, like I was being watched, so I decided to head to bed. My mom had gotten me this cross that she got at a yard sale, and I placed it around my bedpost by my head. Whatever was harassing me had watched that episode because it proceeded to copy the spirits in that show. I could see these actual handprints pressing into my mattress, shoving my bed as hard as it could. I didn't want to move, but it subsided, and I bounded off the bed, leaping all the way to the door to my sister's room to ask for help. She, knowing fully well that these things exist, said, "Just tell it to go away." Well, that didn't work, because when I went back to lay down, after I said that, whatever it was began punching my headboard over and over as hard as it could. Again, I will reiterate that I didn't scream or panic because I had seen much worse than this in my younger days. This was just a very physical attack. I was beginning to fear if this thing was going to attack me physically and not just hit the bed, and the next morning, my cross necklace was missing. I finally found it broken in 2 pieces under my dirty laundry pile. When I was trying to sleep the night this happened, I could almost hear, "You are an abomination. You have dirty blood," over and over, but wasn't sure if it was just my mind. This neighborhood, as I said, was by a park with an old creek next to it, and I had wondered if the water was drawing spirits. As a child, whenever I was walking around the woods, I felt like there were many presences in the trees watching me angrily, especially if it was getting dark, or was dark already. It wasn't until 2014, when my psychic abilities became more powerful, that I had pieced some of this together, and in 2017 when I fully realized what was going on. In 2014, I was lying down, channeling what had happened, when I realized that Native Americans lived by this creek, and maybe these were angry spirits. It was then that I saw a vision of the Spanish conquistadors approaching the native villages with their shields, their flags, armor, and helmets, bearing the Christian cross, and it all dawned on me. I am Spanish, Native American, and European. My dad is half Spanish and strongly Apache, and my mom is English and German. I believe some of these spirits were mad that my blood was dirty due to being Spanish, and this is why they crushed my cross. When this incident happened, being raised Christian, I was sure that these shadowy figures attacking me and crushing my cross were demons. It was in that moment that I realized that they despised the cross, an image of hope to the modern world. But for these innocent, unsuspecting people, the cross represented something much worse: death, slaughter, rape, and torture, which we now know historically. The Spanish were ruthless during this time in Europe and North America. I suddenly felt so much pain in my heart, and this is where things may become unbelievable for some people. But as I had developed my mediumship skills by this point to finally communicate back with these entities over my lifetime, I took my friend Melanie to that same park in 2014 by the creek to see what I could channel. It was then when a very honorable and stern man appeared, who seemed to be wearing the Plains native-style clothing with the headdress, and I got the feeling that he was a chief from the 1800s. Now, what schools in history do not teach is that Colorado had become a main battle site for many tribes from all over the country to band together to fight the Europeans and pioneers taking over their turf. I found this information by chance in a book about Colorado that I found from a thrift store. This is not taught in our history here. I believe this is why I have encountered several natives in different dress from different times and tribes, willing to communicate with me. This man said that he was disappointed in some of his people, and that many have stayed behind after their death to attack the white man for taking their land. But he had sadness in his heart, for that was not their true way. He gave me the impression that many had formed factions and banded together to torment those living in this land now. I also could see that they had learned the ability to shapeshift and could scare the daylights out of people in the hope that they could scare enough off to reclaim their land again. He even went on to describe several things about the Star People, but that is another story for another time. The thing is, in 2017, I encountered a friend who told me a story about her girlfriend, who was also part native like me, native and European, but born on a reservation in Oklahoma. She said her girlfriend had been tormented her entire life by these entities that were a half dog, half man. She saw them as shadow forms at night or in nightmares that would traumatize her. I started to realize a pattern here, as some of these things that she told me correlated with things I had experienced. It was then that I searched Dogman Spirit and came across, you guessed it, Skinwalkers. The more I dug into it, the more I realized that not only do these things exist, but they often make those horrific shrieking sounds at night that I was all too familiar with. I think it was when I had heard the episode about noises in the woods that I said, yep, this show is legit. I have ascertained that these things like to target people who are of mixed native descent, and because I am Spanish and Apache, and also Choctaw from my native grandfather and my mom's side as well, and with a Spanish surname, I am sure I was a major target, especially being psychic. I do feel strong compassion for these spirits now, whereas before I thought I was being tormented by demons. I almost wondered if the reason why I am Spanish and Apache is due to being related to conquistadors who married natives, and if my distant relatives did anything to create a family curse that I needed to break. Anyway, after my research into this, I believe that these angry natives can truly shapeshift, and they do indeed watch us, even during mundane activities. This is why I try not to watch scary movies at home in the open, as I can tell you that any negative entity can and will get ideas, and some have indeed learned to shapeshift. This also explains why I am not afraid of them, as I know that many of these beings were or should have been human, and it is like their own form of Halloween, by disguising themselves as something that I am scared of to try and terrify me. It was when I decided to scare them back that I decided to mentally use the image of a scary clown when they would try to communicate telepathically that I realized I could ward them off this way. This is why my alias, Lunico, is a clown, but I didn't put that together until I really thought about it. She was a defense mechanism against all this evil I have encountered my entire life, and is almost a mockery of it to them. Some find the clown thing a bit unnerving, but most think it's really cool, but they don't know the backstory, which I plan to draw into short story comics if anyone is interested at any point. I am a very visual person, and I think I can make a pretty scary rendering of all these incidents. Thanks for taking the time to read all this. I know it's a lot. The theme song in the Land Between the Lakes episode was so awesome, I even drew a picture of it. I attached it if you want to take a look. I can also explain my near-death experience at some point when I was 7 that led to my psychic abilities becoming stronger, if you are interested. Please take care. Sincerely, Lunico. As we come to the end of this edition of Midweek Mysteries, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. And a special thank you goes out to Lunico for writing in and sharing their experience with all of us. If any of you have thoughts, advice, or a similar experience that you'd like to share with tonight's storyteller, you can email me, and I'll be sure to forward your message onto them. If you've witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy rest of the week, and we'll see you back here on Sunday with our next full-length episode. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, thank you so much for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.